Serious people who have found a secret room or space in their house. How long did you live in the house before you found it, and what was in it? What was the eventual outcome of finding the room? Here's what Redditors have to say. I found a secret space in my closet when my mom and I were moving out of the house she was renting to move into my stepdad's house. I never noticed it because junk covered the section of the wall that was covering a small entrance to a room that was sealed off with boards and plywood. I couldn't pry it open, but I could see light shining in it and a single mason jar filled with what I assumed was water. The air was cold in there, like as if the central heating didn't even reach that part. I showed it to my mom and she told me that she doesn't remember seeing that there when we had moved in 8 years prior, but since we were moving out, it didn't matter. The room gave me the creeps for whatever reason. I know why it was sealed off, or why there was a single mason jar filled with water in the center of the room. Probably moonshine from Prohibition. That is actually intriguing me now. How old was the house, and is it near a water source? Someone probably put it there because of a leaky roof. SA. Don't ruin the magic. My parents bought a house from an old family member to help her pay for nursing home care. She hadn't lived in the house for years at that point. She was a hoarder and we were tasked with cleaning up the house over the course of a summer in order to make it livable prior to the start of school. Rat carcasses fused to the carpet, old tax documents from the 60s, etc. Well, we were scraping up the linoleum tiling, covering the original hardwood floor, disappointingly enough, in a side room, when I made the joke about the previous resident being a secret mass murderer and that there was a trapdoor under the linoleum full of dead bodies. I pulled up a huge section of tiling only to find a trapdoor underneath. Scared the shit out of me, but when we finally built up enough courage to open the damned thing, we discovered there was nothing under there. It was a walled off section of the basement with a dirt floor. We suspected was an old root cellar from back when farmers had to store their in a cold, dark place to prevent it from spoiling. We moved into a house with a door in the kitchen that could not be opened. The real estate tried but failed, assumed it led to the laundry room, but was walled off. My older siblings, like any typical teenagers, were not convinced of this and were determined to open it. It was just a normal pantry, but they never told our mother they managed to open it and used it to hide things from her like alcohol, smokes, and weed. I can't imagine buying a house and not opening every door in the place. The curiosity about the building I just bought would drive me onwards, even if I had to disassemble things to do it. I know. Like, how could you sleep? Just not knowing would kill me, and if I didn't check then one day a demon would come out and kill me. That's the thing with the Haunting of Hill House. I would open that damn door before I bought that house. Watched Home Alone and saw that attic that Macaulay Culkin was staying in and wondered if we had one in our townhouse. Ran around with a stepladder until I found it in my mum's closet. Got on my tiptoes on the stepladder and fought the door open. Ended up being a big piece of plywood and peered into the attic. A mouse colony stared back. It was like that scene in Ratatouille. Decades worth of fesses covered the whole space. My mom was not happy once I told her. We moved shortly after. How you moved because of that? I mean, it's understandable considering how disgusting and awful it'd be to have to completely remove all the mice and clean up all the shit. I don't get how they didn't smell it or hear them though. I don't know anything about mice, but rat shiz quickly starts to reek, even if you only have a couple of them. In my experience, it's not the fesses that you smell when it comes to mice but their urine. However, in a closed-in space like an attic or car trunk you don't really smell it until you open that space. Source: I currently have several locations where I'm conducting a war of attrition with some mice. When clearing out my grandma's house I found a small door in the wall of the basement that led to a tiny room. According to my mother, that's where they hid the family heirlooms when thieving relatives came to town. I was mostly interested in the fact that it was covered in scribbles from my mom and her sisters growing up. A couple of years ago I rented an apartment that was in a massive old architecture style building. No idea how old it was. I remember when I did the showing they showed me a door that had an elaborate staircase that went straight up to the ceiling and explained that it went to the attic, which was sealed up. When I was finally moving out, curiosity got the best of me and I pushed on the panel at the top of the stairs until it popped open and hoisted myself up there. It was completely dark and the floor was covered in at least an inch of dust, and I found that it was an entire extra floor to my unit. There was some old rotting furniture and magazines littered throughout the rooms. I eventually found a small hole in one of the walls that went into the sealed off upstairs of the unit next to mine and decided to go through that one too. I found a smaller hole at the back end of that area that led to the next one. I eventually made my way through about 5 or 6 of these sealed off spaces that had no entrances save these small holes in drywall. The farther I went in, the older the furniture I found. Fridges from the 50s or earlier, old dishware, and so much dust over everything. The last unit was the most interesting. Hand painted scenes on the walls and holes to the attic letting sunlight stream in. I took small videos, but they are all on Snapchat, so they are hard to post. I must have been up there for hours just exploring alone in the dark. I was pretty lucky to have the only room with access up there. Lived in a warehouse in Melbourne. Always thought it would be cool to get on the roof, but there was no access. After about 6 months, I'm standing in front of mirror upstairs when I notice it has hinges. I push on it, it clicks and opens out, revealing a small attic and roof hatch. That was pretty cool. Used to sit up there and watch the sunset over the city. You lived in a warehouse. Well, converted into a big apartment. That makes more sense. Back in college, some friends and I rented an old mansion that had been built in the early 1920s from an elderly lady. The place was falling apart, but it was huge and rent was dirt cheap. About 2 years into living there, I went to the basement to do some laundry and momentarily lost my balance, reaching out to steady myself using one of the wall panels. It flexed more than I expected, and after some inspection I found that it was removable. Behind it was a small, mostly empty, very dirty concrete room about 100 square feet. I say mostly empty because right in the middle there was a hole the size of a well that had been previously bricked up. It must have been old because the bricks had eroded at some point and exposed some of the hole, maybe a 2 feet diameter circle out of the full 5 feet. After calling my friends down to look at it, I got the courage to creep a little closer and peer down into it. There was another room roughly the same size but deep, maybe 15 feet down, and mostly dirt. We shined a flashlight down into it, and I could swear there was a teddy bear at the bottom. Unfortunately, despite plenty bargaining, none of us were ever able to work up the courage, liquid or regular, to tear open climb down for a closer look. Especially after we noticed that the bricks which I thought had fallen in were all accounted for, scattered around the hole, as if something had broken out. At the risk of my account being discovered by my Redditor friends, this was in Pittsburgh. We did a little research and think the sub-basement may have been related to prohibition, but honestly I'm just willing to accept that explanation in order to avoid lifelong nightmares. My friends had a thing like this in their basement in Boston. They called it the hole and had weird hole themed parties. Helping my granddad move house, we accidentally found access to the underfloor area, not even big enough to really call a crawl space I don't think. Spotty memory. There was a small pile of trash from the 60s and 70s, juice cans, chocolate bar wrappers and crumpled newspapers, and bits of discarded construction debris and some broken tools. We think it must have been used by the builders in lieu of a trash can. It was cool, an accidental time capsule. It was about a year into owning our house. We actually found 2 secret rooms. One was just a room under the stairs that was closed off. Had some toys from the 70s in it. The really crazy one was when we redid the insulation in our attic. One of the workers asked if I knew there was a room up there. I had no idea, So we cut open the drywall and there were stacks on stacks of boxes from the 60s. Like a ton of boxes. And they were all full. So I opened them up expecting some cool stuff. And they were full of freaking pine cones. One of the bigger bummers of my life. When I was younger, my family would go and collect pine cones and store them in our attic. We would use them for kindling in the winter. That sounds like it smells amazing.